everyone. Welcome to the latest edition of Breaking into Product Management. Today we have with us Clement Cow, a product manager at Blend, and the co-founder of PMHQ, that's Product Manager HQ. So I'll give you guys a brief intro about the product folks. We are a community of product managers and aspirants who wish to create a culture about product management in India. And we host events, we've done workshops, among much more. And in a month or so, that is 10th October, we will be hosting our first product conference in association with Inc. 42. We will be having with us Harsha Kumar, Aniket Sampit, and other angel investors, co-founder of White Hat Junior, co-founder of Zerodha, co-founder of Chingari, among others. So do join in, do register for the same. And I will be sharing the link for the conference in the chat in a while. So stay tuned for that. And today, as I mentioned, we have with us Clement Cow, who's the co-founder of PMHQ and the product manager at Blend. So Clement, could you just give you a brief introduction about yourself to us?
Yeah, for sure. I'm Clement. I am currently based in San Francisco, and I work as a product manager as my full-time job at Blend, which is a fintech startup. Basically, our goal is to make it really easy for consumers to be able to get access to capital. That means mortgages, home equity lines of credit, auto loans, et cetera, right? Really making it easy for people to be able to work with their financial institutions to have all of their financial needs met. On the other side of the house, what I do outside of work is I'm also one of the co-founders of Product Manager HQ, which is a global community of product managers who are all looking to grow and help one another, right? So we've basically got 3 pillars. The first pillar is our Slack community. We've got more than 8,000 folks in there, kind of ranging from a variety of industries, a variety of seniorities, where people are just talking about, what are the different things that we're tackling day to day? How do we continue to grow together like that? The second pillar is our newsletter. So basically looking across the web, what are the best resources in terms of product management? We select the top 5 and we share that out every week. And the third part, which I'm most in charge of, is our blog. And so sharing out our knowledge on what is product management and how to help others continue to grow there. So with PMHQ, I've gone ahead and published more than 70 articles on product management. And I've also written 2 books with PMHQ, 1 book outside of PMHQ on product management. So again, really excited to be here today and to share my knowledge.
It's our pleasure to have you on board, Clement. So before we start anything else, let's start with the basics. How were you first introduced to product management?
Yeah, great question. So I honestly became a product manager entirely by accident. And so when I was back in college, when people had told me about product management, I was actually very disinterested at that point in time. And the reason I was so disinterested is because people said, oh, well, what you do is you write up all of these tickets and then you send these tickets over to engineers and then they do them. And I thought, wow, this is really non-compelling. I definitely don't want to do that. So that was my first introduction. But what wound up happening is I had a very long trajectory, I'd say, like a very unguided trajectory where I naturally fell into product management on accident. So when I graduated from college, I had a double major in business and in molecular and cell biology. And of course, those 2 majors don't really turn into any specific career path. And so because of that, what I did was I became a management consultant. As a management consultant, I'd be able to look across all of these different industries and really understand what are the top of mind problems that I can solve for people. As I was a management consultant, one of the things that we did was we used our own in-house analytic software that we use to be able to provide guidance, right? Basically doing A/B tests of, hey, what if you open your hours longer as a restaurant? What if you change the menu? What if you change the store layout and you stock different things, and running all of these A/B tests? But the thing is that software was written by PhD statisticians, but the end users were marketing analysts. And so they didn't understand statistics. They didn't really understand kind of all of the complexity that went behind it. And so I spent so many hours on the phone just serving as tech support of, no, that's not how you set up this analysis. No, that's not what this error means, et cetera. And so from there, I basically pivoted into user research, where I was gathering my clients' feedback and sharing that with my product team in terms of, these are what users are trying to do. Here's their mental model, and here's why the product doesn't do what it is that they want it to do. And so because of that, basically I became kind of this prototyper and user researcher, where I was working with my product team to flesh out all of these different prototypes. And through that, we were able to build a new generation of products that were a lot more intuitive and a lot more heavily utilized. So that was a really big success. From there, then I was recruited to join a real estate brokerage, basically, real estate agents who are selling homes, where they wanted me to join them as a user researcher to understand how we can better sell homes. So we already knew how to help people buy homes, but we didn't really know how to help people sell homes. So I did a bunch of user research, basically identified that there was this really interesting user segment to go after with a very interesting, business model for us to go use. And I pitched my executive team, basically pivoting away from user research into strategy. And basically in that corporate strategy role, convincing them that we should go after this user segment, this new business model, this basically startup within a startup. And after I'd convinced them, they said, okay, great. We need to find a product manager to go launch the products that will help us run this new business model. And they didn't have one on hand. And so they said, oh, well, Clement, given that, you're already like the user researcher who understands the user the best, and you're the ones who convinced us as the executives to start this business, why don't you become the product manager? So basically throughout this very, very long journey, at no point did I say, oh, I want to be a product manager. It's just that that's something that I fell into. And since then I've had a really, really great time just in terms of building really exciting products, being able to, ship a lot of new businesses out of nothing. And so that's been really fun.
Wow, quite the journey you've had so far. So
yeah.
What does product management mean to you? Because from what I have observed, unlike others who actually choose to get into product management, you're someone who just fell right into it. So how has your understanding of this domain been?
Yeah, great question. So the way I think about, I think breaking that into two pieces, right? Like kind of how is it that I'm thinking about what I want to do with my life and how does product management fit into that? And also like, what do I think product management is, right? So basically for me, and this is a little bit personal, the way that I think about my life is I'm meant to help other people. And the more that I can help other people live happier, better, easier lives, kind of the happier that I am with the things that I've been able to contribute to society, right? So I'm all about solving other people's problems. And for me, it didn't necessarily matter whether I became a scientist in a research lab or whether I became an operations manager or whether I became a product manager or an engineer or what have you. I just really wanted to optimize for how can I best solve other people's pains? That's what I really wanted to do. And the way that I see it, product management is a really, really fantastic way to solve for a lot of people's pains in not just a very broad way, but in a very deep way, right? So when you build a product, right, you're not just making, your end users happy, you're making you're making so many other people happier and you're solving so many people's pains, right? So as an example, as a product manager at Blend, right, like when I create these really amazing experiences for borrowers, people who are trying to borrow money, not only are their lives transformed because they can do all of these things with the money that they didn't have before, we're also making financial institutions' lives a lot better, right? We're making lenders, the people who are these loan officers who are making these loans, we make their lives easier as well. That means that we can make all of their executives' lives easier because now they can be focused on, creating really amazing customer experiences. I get to make my fellow colleagues' lives better by creating processes, right? Like how do we have really great retrospectives? How do we have really great sprint processes? How do we share out about our roadmap, align everyone to what it is that our company is doing? And so I think product management just gives me so many more levers to be able to help so many more people in not a very shallow way, in actually a very deep and transformative way. And so just in terms of how I think about product management more academically, so that everyone can kind of follow me as I'm chatting, basically the way that I think about product management is first I think about what did the world look like before we had product managers, right? And so when we think about what the world looked like before we had product managers, there were really three groups of people in the world. You have customers and users. And so customers and users are the people who are, they have a lot of pain and they don't really know how to solve the pain themselves, but they're willing to pay to have it solved, whether that payment is in terms of time or money. Like they're willing to have something to help them work through all of this pain. Then you have like the business. And so what a business is basically what it wants to do is it wants to provide shareholder value, right? It wants to make sure that it can be profitable and keep people employed by creating, solutions for customers and users, right? So that's what a business wants, and kind of everyone within the business, whether that's marketing, finance, accounting, legal, information, security, et cetera, all of these departments I consider as business. And then there's the development team. And so the final group is basically engineers, designers, QA, where they want to build something that they think is really cool and really exciting, but they also want to make sure that it's scalable, that it's robust, that it doesn't break all day, right? Like they want to make sure that they can actually maintain the thing that they're building. And so in this world with no product managers, these three groups are fighting all the time. And so basically customers tell businesses, well, I want your products for free, or I want it at a much reduced price, or I want you to do something that you're not currently offering, right? And sometimes that doesn't work out very well. A lot of times businesses, they try to sell customers things that customers don't need. And that's not a good thing either, right? So like these two groups fight all the time. Customers and developers fight all the time because customers say, I need you to build something, like I need you to build some button on some screen. And then the engineers are saying, well, that's not how the tech stack works. We absolutely can't build it that way. And sometimes engineers and designers, they try to ship something that they think is really cool, but doesn't really solve the customer's pain. And like, that's not good either, right? And then engineers, developers and businesses, they also fight all the time because businesses want people to be feature factories. The more features you ship, the more we can sell. But like the way that, of course, engineers and designers think is, no, we want to make refactors. We want to make sure that the thing that we're building is really robust and really scalable and really, really pleasing. And so in terms of like, what is the business value of velocity, there's a lot of disagreement here too, right? And so basically, the product is the one thing that solves a customer pain while being profitable to a business to make its shareholders happy and keep employees employed. And engineers and designers are willing to build and maintain over time. And then by definition, the product manager is the person who's working across all of these three groups, the customers, the business, and the developers, to create something that's going to last for a really long time. And so I think the fun part of being a product manager is you get to solve for all three of these pains simultaneously. And it's actually because of these constraints that you get to be so creative, right? It's like, you have to think about, oh no, but like customers have these kinds of pains, businesses have these kind of constraints, engineers and developers have these kinds of concerns. How are we going to creatively solution around this, right? And I think creativity comes from being constrained, right? Like it's much easier for you to, let's say, write a short story about, vampires in the 16th century in Africa than it is for me to just say, go write a book, right? Like you'd say, well, what am I writing a book on, right? And so when you're constrained by all of these different pieces, you're able to create really amazing solutions that didn't exist before that solve for all of these people's pains simultaneously. So I think that's the most exciting part about product management, which is why I've been a product manager for a while
now. In 12 episodes of doing this, I don't think I've come across the kind of clarity that you've just displayed in 2, 3 minutes or 5 minutes here. So I might have to pivot here because this perspective that you've just displayed here, that isn't something I've come across before in all the articles I've read, the people I've spoken to. So where does this come from? Is it experience? Is it how Clement Cow looks at life? Or is it any book or article or people you follow? Like, where does this come from?
Yeah, great question. So for me, it came from personal experience, right? And so basically, for me, right, like I started off on kind of the customer side of the house. And what I mean by starting on the customer side is basically, I originally started as a consultant. And so I really deeply understood what it is that customers were trying to do. But I didn't necessarily understand like the business's needs, and I didn't necessarily understand the developer's needs, right? When I moved over to the business side of the house in terms of trying to pitch this new business model, from there, basically that's where I learned about, here are all of these business constraints. And then when I did become a product manager, like that's where I started learning about what engineers and designers are looking for, right? And so I think for me, it wasn't necessarily anything that was academically taught. It was more just something that I had come across into. So there is that. So it looks like, unfortunately, Kunj has dropped off. Okay. We will wait for him to come back. So sorry about that. I guess just in terms of, hey, welcome back.
I'm sorry, something went wrong with my internet. So yes, I think we can continue. I guess everyone else was following you. So please continue with you.
Yeah. So basically, going back to the original question, just for you to be able to hear that, basically, how did I come up with like this framework of like, here are the three stakeholders? I think before I've definitely seen articles on like, hey, it's like the difference between like tech and UX and business, but I didn't necessarily find that to be the most satisfying response for how do you actually build a really compelling product? And so I think a lot of it is my own lived experiences where first, I started as a consultant, right? And as a consultant, I am the advocate for customers and users, right? And so I think that's where I started in that product management triangle, is I very much started on like the user side of the house. And like, that's how I became a user researcher, right? And so as a user researcher, then I worked with my product team and engineers and designers. And so basically I moved along this side of the triangle away from just being customer facing towards being more engineering facing and more design facing, right? And then when I moved over to that other business, where they had brought me on as this user researcher, right? Like basically, instead of trying to bridge the gap between customers and engineers and designers, I was trying to bridge the gap between customers and the business. Like we wanted to do something in the business that we didn't quite know how to do with the customers that we didn't quite understand. And so basically I moved from here down here in terms of just like customers and business, what are the things that they are conflicting about and how can I find value for them, right? And so because I had some amount of experience here and here, like that started to build out some of this like foundation of, okay, what is it that, you know, customers need? What do businesses need? What do engineers and designers need? Right. And then when I became a product manager, right, where I got pushed into the center, you know, the way in which I became a product manager was that my executive team made me sit down for 1 week with an engineer and 1 week with a designer just to learn about everything. Cause like at that point in time, right, like again, I came from a business and biology background, right? Like I don't know anything about Git. I know nothing about Figma. Like I have no idea any of the tools, any of the pains that people are facing. And so I learned a lot by, you know, shadowing them. And basically from there, I learned that I have all of these customers that I need to serve, right? Like I have paying customers that I need to serve, right? But my engineering design team, my Scrum team, like they're also my customers, right? Like they're like, I am trying to solve their pain, right? Like, how do I make sure that their daily lives are a lot easier in terms of being really clear? What are the deadlines? Why are we doing the things that we're doing? What are the constraints? How are customers thinking, right? Like, how do I provide all of this value to them? And same thing with my business stakeholders, right? It's like, why did I decide that that was the roadmap? Why did I decide that we weren't able to ship a thing in time? How do we make the decision to like, you know, send this thing to a customer, not send this thing to a customer? How do we position the product to work for customers, right? And so kind of, because I had all of this experience in serving each of these stakeholders individually, like that's how I kind of came to realize that, oh, product is actually trying to simultaneously serve for kind of all three of these stakeholders at once.
I wish I could have a journey like yours, but I would be joining in as an associate sometime soon. So is there, I mean, I can't have your journey. No, I don't think others can either, but they can surely maybe read up on your books and other books that you have been inspired from. So any book suggestions, any articles that you'd like to recommend?
Yeah, for sure. So at least in terms of, you know, this framework that I laid out about how like a product manager fills the space between these three stakeholders, I've written about that in my book, Breaking into Product Management. It's in the book.
I hope you don't sue us.
I think the other thing that is, you know, really valuable to think about is basically, you know, as product managers, we ship a lot of products and we will continue to ship a lot of products. But at the end of the day, the most valuable product that we will ever ship is ourselves. Like we ourselves are also products. And I think when we use this meta product management mindset on ourselves, that's actually really valuable because that makes us better understand how can we create positive impact in the world, right? And what do I mean by that? Well, what I mean is, first off, products require product market fit, right? And so as an example, right, like credit cards are heavily used in the United States. And so people are like, oh, well, credit cards are a fantastic product. Yeah, but people in China don't use credit cards, right? Like that's not a technology that, you know, is used a lot in China. And so can you go and say that credit cards are a good product or a bad product? No, you can't. Like it really depends on the context, right? Similarly, like if we talk about like Twitter or Instagram, right? Like those are fantastic tech products, sure, but like, do our grandparents use them? No, like our grandparents don't use Instagram and they don't use Twitter. And that doesn't mean that they're bad products. It means that they don't fit that market segment, right? And so when we think about it that way, then we start to understand that there's no such thing in the world as a universally good product. The only thing that exists in the world are products that fit their markets really, really well, right? And so that's really inspiring because that means that we don't have to feel bad as product managers if we get rejected, because that means that we didn't find product market fit. It doesn't mean that we're bad candidates. And so as an example, right, I happen to be a particularly good business to business product manager. I happen to be really good at working with kind of enterprise. But because I'm really good at that set of skill sets, like there are things that I'm really good at.
Right.
For example, doing really deep user research, convincing customer stakeholders, talking to customer executives, working through like change management of how do you implement this software that I built? How do you build a new process around this software that I ship you? But that makes me not a very good business to consumer product manager, right? Like I don't do A/B tests because you can't A/B test a productivity software that a bank is using, right? And so like A/B tests, right, and like kind of like growth hacking are not things in my skill set. And that just means that I'm not going to be a good fit for, let's say, let's say Twitter, right, or like Facebook. And that doesn't mean that I'm a bad product manager. It just means that I'm not a good fit for the business to consumer type needs. I'm a much better fit in like the business to business side, right? And so I think the most critical thing for us to consider is what markets are we trying to target? And does that market value our value proposition? Like the things that we're really good at? Because if they don't, that doesn't mean that we don't have value. It just means that our value is not being understood by this market or is not valued by this market. Let's go find a different market, right? And so I think that's also really valuable when you're thinking about how do I get promoted within my own company, right? Like as an example, when you first get hired as like, let's say an associate product manager or like as a business analyst, your company has some set of needs, but those needs will change over time. And so you can't just keep saying, oh, I'm going to keep doing the same thing that I'm doing and hope that I get promoted. You have to always be proactively evaluating your company to understand what are their pains, what are their unsolved pains, and how can I reach in to go solve these pains, right? Because to talk about my journey again, right? As a consultant, I did user research. No one told me to go do user research. Like that's just a thing that I reached out and did because I thought it was really painful that my clients couldn't use our software. And I thought it was a waste of time for so many other consultants like me to be on the phone all day talking to customer support. I thought, well, if we had better user experiences, we wouldn't have to be on the phone all day, right? So I was proactive and I moved into user research, right? Then similarly, at that other company where I was a user researcher, I moved into like I moved into like corporate strategy, not because they told me to, but because I thought that it was really important that we go after this market that I had discovered, right? And so kind of like, as you think about how do you move forward in your career, look for those unmet pains and unmet needs and see what are the values that you can bring to solve them, right? I think just one last point basically on this whole thesis of product managers are also products. The one thing to keep in mind, right, is like a product is never perfect. Like products always have roadmaps. And I think again, like that's something that's so inspiring to me as a product manager. Because sometimes when I think about, the work that I'm doing, sometimes I think, oh my gosh, like I could be so much better at engineering. I could be so much better at design. I could be so much better at marketing, or I could be so much better at, strategy or whatever, right? Like there are just so many different things that you need to be good at to be a fantastic product manager. But that doesn't mean you need to be good at all of them right now. It just means that there is a roadmap kind of over time that you get to build on, right? And so rather than trying to boil the ocean and try to do everything at once, you can instead, be really thoughtful about, okay, well, what does my market need? What does my manager need? Or what does this company that I want to join, what do they need? And then start building out your roadmap to start moving in that direction. Because again, like some companies, they value some things and other companies don't value those things, right? As an example, within the United States, some companies really value MBAs, right? Like Masters of Business Administration for their product managers. And some organizations very much don't value those. And so you can't just universally go get an MBA and then say, oh, great, every organization wants me, because that's not true, right? Like similarly, should I become a certified Scrum Master? Should I become a certified product owner? These are good questions, but you can't answer them yourself. You have to go do the market research of, for the people that are hiring, do they want these skill sets? Is it valuable to them, right? And so, when people ask me, Clement, what tech stack should I learn? What project should I do, et cetera? I say, I can't tell you the answer because I'm not your employer. You need to go reach out to the market that you want to attack and understand their pains so that you can build your roadmap to go attack that market. Because if you don't understand the pain you're trying to solve, you're never going to be able to solve it. So kind of, I realized that was like a very long discussion, but I think it is really important for product managers to remember that they are themselves products and to use all of these product management mindsets on themselves as well. How do I do retrospectives to improve myself, right? Like, how do I manage my time in terms of, on a sprintly basis or point basis or whatever? How do I make sure that I'm tackling the highest ROI, return on investment items? How do I understand what markets I'm trying to attack? How do I grow myself and like create a roadmap? And how do I not feel discouraged when someone rejects me, right? Because again, like rejection is actually giving you a signal. It's teaching you that this is not the market that, is going to find value with you. And so that's not a bad thing. That's actually a really, really good thing to get rejected so that okay, these are the things that people find valuable, and these are the things that people don't find valuable about me as a solution.
Wow, that's a ton of information out there, right there. And okay, so once you understand where it is that you can provide value, the kind of PM you can be, you figure out a roadmap, try and create value by pursuing projects or just about anything else. How do you then present that value or yourself in interviews? Like, how did you go about with your interviews? What is it that others should keep in mind for their PM interviews? Like, what would you say about that?
Yeah, for sure. So in terms of the interview process, and again, kind of this goes all the way back to thinking about ourselves as product. I think a lot of the time when people go into interviews, they come in thinking of themselves as candidates, right? And so there's a lot of fear when people go into interviews. Like I see a lot of fear when I'm talking to people because they're worried about, am I saying the right thing? Do I look good, right? Like, do I sound confident? Like, is my handshake appropriately firm, right? Like they're worried about all these really small details because they're trying to be the perfect candidate, right? But the thing is, I don't want a perfect candidate. I want to find a solution to my organization's pain as a hiring manager, right? And so I think when people come in and interview as candidates, they freak out because they're so worried about leaving a good impression. But like, it is not the impression that matters. It is how much value are you going to bring to this particular organization in that particular role, right? And so when instead of trying to being a candidate, you turn into being the solution, you're working collaboratively with your interviewer, right? I think a lot of times people go in and they're like, oh my gosh, the interviewer is going to ask me all these really scary questions. And I need to make sure that like, I answer them in like exactly the perfect way or whatever. And it's like, that's not what the interviewer wants. Like they want to understand, are you going to solve my pain, right? And so the thing that happens, which is really magical, is when a product manager goes into an interview and they actually take on this aura of really trying to understand what is the interviewer's pain and like, what are the challenges that they're facing and how can I help to solve these pains? How can I provide all that value to you? Now you're collaborating with them. And that's exactly what they want, right? Like they're looking for a colleague to collaborate with them in the long-term future, right? And so when people move from thinking about themselves as candidates to thinking about themselves as solutions, that interview process becomes a lot easier because then you're no longer so worried about really the small, insignificant details. You're really focused on that other person and that other company. How can I really understand what their concerns are and how can I help them work through those concerns, right? Because the thing is, companies, hiring managers, they are customers, right? And the thing is, I think a lot of people, when they're applying for positions, they think, oh, well, if I meet the minimum requirements, that's enough, and they should hire me. And that's not true. Because the thing is, when companies are looking for people, they can always select the best, right? Like no company in their right minds would select someone who is the minimum bar if there's someone who's way better, right? And so one of the things that you want to keep in mind is, companies, they're looking to purchase a product, like when they're trying to hire a PM candidate. And so from that perspective, you need to demonstrate that you are the best solution. You can't just be a good enough solution. You need to be better than every other candidate that they've got, right? And so the only way for you to demonstrate that you are a better solution than every other candidate is to do things differently, right? Which is understanding their pains and understanding their needs, right? So what I like to do before I enter any interview is I do a lot of research on that company. Like I'm trying to understand what are the pains that they have, right? Like, is it that they're trying to break into a new market and that they need someone who knows how to do that? Is it that they are trying to grow their existing team and they're missing some set of skill sets? What are the skill sets that are missing, right? Like, how can I show that I've got exactly what it is that they need? And like, that is exactly the value that they're looking for, right? So basically, you want to optimize for fit to that specific employer. Your goal is not to optimize for kind of universally good product manager. Because again, like that thing doesn't exist. Like there are no universally good product managers. There are only amazing product managers who fit their companies and their problem statements really, really well. The same way that there are no universally good products, there are only products that fit their markets really, really well, right? And so when you think about it from that perspective, the interview becomes a lot less freaky. Like it's a lot less stress and it's a lot more fun because you get to exercise all of these product management capabilities of really understanding who is sitting across from me, what are their pains, and how can I reach in to solve these pains on their behalf? And then you get to see them smile. Like you get to see them be so happy that they finally met someone who really understands their problems and that you're going to go solve those problems for them, right? if you demonstrate that you're going to be the best solution, people are going to chase you, right? Because like no one wants to let the solution run away from them, right? So I think, again, from an interview perspective, I don't think it's any one specific task that you do that's going to make you stand out. It's more of a mindset shift, right? Instead of trying to think about, oh no, I'm competing against all these candidates and I need to be like exactly perfect. It's a lot more about put yourself out of the equation. You don't matter. The company matters. What are their pains? Who are their competitors? What are they trying to do with themselves? Who do they think they are? Who do they want to become, right? Like then stepping in and understanding, okay, they're missing these pieces. I have these pieces. Let me demonstrate to them that I'm going to solve their pain the best. And then they're not going to want to attempt to hire anyone else, right? So kind of that's the way that I think about it is you're going in there in an interview to solution for that company. You're not going in there to try to fight against other candidates to get this one job. That's not the point. The point's not to get the job. The point is to demonstrate that you know how to solve that company's pain.
Right. So it just all comes down to understanding the product, the company, the people involved, and to be able to provide a solution.
Yeah.
So we've covered your journey up till Blend, how you feel about product management, interviews, everything that was there to discuss. But we're still missing one key piece, which is PMHQ. How did that happen in this entire journey that you've had so far? Where did you come up with the idea of creating something like PMHQ? How has that been so far? The challenges, just about everything about PMHQ. Please tell us about it.
Yeah, for sure. So with Product Manager HQ, basically my co-founder and I ran into the same pains together, which is at that time, we were like junior level product managers and we had no idea, like, how are we going to level up as product managers, right? Like back then there weren't a lot of resources for, people learning to break in a product. And, it was just really hard for us to find mentors. It was really hard for us to find any sort of like really clear track of how are we going to go tackle the problem, right? And so I think really Product Manager HQ was something that Kevin and I had built really for ourselves. And then that just wound up resonating with a bunch of people, right? So basically the first part was the very first set of pains that we had is, it's really hard to find mentors at work. It's really hard to find people who I can talk through my problems with. How can we make that pain better? And I said, oh, well, a Slack community might be a really great way to solve that pain. And so basically we reached out to other product managers that we knew, other product folks, and basically pulled them into the Slack community and like curated and like guided these conversations about like, people struggling with, working with remote teams or working with like executives or whatever, and basically seeing all this organic conversation come to life, right? And so the Slack community is really all about that. It's community. It's people working together to solve problems for one another, right? And so that was how we had created the Slack community. And like, that was really, really fantastic, but it itself couldn't solve every pain because the thing is, we only had our own collective set of knowledge, right? Like in terms of the people that we invited in, how are we going to level up? Like, how are we going to be able to continue to grow if there are all these concepts that like we all, as like junior to mid-level product managers, we only know this much stuff. What about the higher level stuff that like directors or VPs or heads of product know about? And so what we did then is we then started thinking, okay, well, one of the problems that exists out there is that there are, at that point in time, like the landscape had changed a little bit where there was so much content that was potentially relevant, but it wasn't necessarily all 100% relevant, right? Like, should you be learning about business stuff? Should you be learning about design stuff? Should you be learning about like Scrum stuff? Like people didn't necessarily know, and there were just way too many potential sources of information. And so we said, the one thing that's going to be really helpful is let's help curate these down so that people have very targeted materials to read every week. And that is then another way for people to grow. And so that's how we created the newsletter, right? So the newsletter is then a way to bring information into our community of like, these are the things that we see product leaders doing based on like the things that we're seeing in terms of podcasts or videos or blogs, right? Like these are the things that you should be reading about this week. And so basically that curation of information into the community was really, really valuable. And so then that's how we started the newsletter. And so of course that was all really, really great. But then one of the things that we found was problematic is there's still not a very strong set of B2B PM materials. I think there's a lot of, in today's world, there's a lot more materials that are really solid on the business to consumer side of the house for product management, but there's still not a lot of strength on the business to business side, right? Like, and so one of the things that we said is, well, we have all this knowledge that this community has. how do we share out that knowledge to others? And so then that's basically how we decided to come up with the blog of, okay, like let's write about the things that we uniquely know about and share our perspectives and do it in a way that's going to be really valuable to other people, right? And so basically the way in which I think about the blog and like the articles that I write is basically, one of the things that I found really frustrating is when people talk too high level, right? It's like, oh, here are all these principles. I'm like, great, I have no idea how to use these principles, right? And so I didn't want articles to just be like very high level, here are the things that you should think about when X, Y, Z. That's not helpful to me. Right. But on the flip side, I also found that when people share anecdotes of like, I did a thing and here's all the things that I did and here's like the end outcome, it was very unhelpful because I didn't really know what to abstract out of it and take into my own experiences, right? And so there's a problem of, the high level frameworks, I have no idea how to apply. And the low level like anecdotes, I have no idea how to extract. And so the way in which I write the articles for PMHQ is a combination of both. It is based on my own personal experiences, tackling an actual problem that I ran into myself. What are the high level frameworks that you can take with you? And what are the ways in which you can configure and customize that framework to your own specific situation so that then you can take my experiences and run with them, right? And so like, that is why we've seen, so many readers of the PMHQ resources. We've had, more than 1.5 million views on the blog, right? Like we've written, so many articles, so many books that have done really well. And that's all because, it was really trying to understand what is it that people are looking for when they're trying to read something, right? When they're trying to read something, it's, I want to become a better product manager, but if you give me all these high level theoretical frameworks, I don't know how to apply them. If you give me all these anecdotes, I have no idea what I'm supposed to be learning from you. And so it's how do we solve for that pain based on the current landscape of the world, right? And so I think, with PMHQ, the way that we tackled everything at PMHQ is very much as product managers first, trying to solve for our own pains. And I think, that has been really, really successful just in terms of doing it that way. And so I think for me, PMHQ is very much like, it's very much like a passion project that very much aligns with my own identity. Because for me, right, like I'm just trying to solve the pains that I keep running into, right? And I want to do that so that no one else has to run into my pains again, right? Because again, the thing that I said is I want to make the world a better place. Like I want people to live happier, easier, better lives. And that means that if I've hit the pain before, I don't want other people to run into that pain anymore, right? And so, that's why I do so much writing. That's why like I do all these speaker events, because I'm really interested in how do we help other people move into product management, which is such a high leverage field, right? Basically, today's world is very much governed by software, and the people who make the software come to life are the product managers, right? Like by making sure that product managers have an easier and easier time in becoming product managers, right? Like we're able to make the world a much better place, a much more positive place. And so kind of that is what really gives me a lot of energy in terms of contributing to PMHQ and just trying to be a resource for people.
Right. You just mentioned about how is it that you get the energy to do so much work that you've put out. And for those who are not aware, you've authored 3 books, you handled PMHQ, basically you created it and got it so far. You've worked at Blend, and on top of it, there's so much more that you do, the speaker events and all that you've mentioned so far. How do you manage your own personal affairs? Do you become a PM there? Or are there any other frameworks? Like how do you produce a body of work like you have?
Yeah, great question. So I think, there are kind of like 2 parts to that question, right? So it's basically, like what are like the systems that I put in place? And then like, how do I think about like prioritization, right? And so to tackle the prioritization question first, I think basically one of the things that can happen is, one of the things that happens is if you take on too many different responsibilities at once, kind of you'll get overloaded and you'll burn out, right? And so I think one of the things that's really important is to first identify what are the things that matter the most to you and to schedule those things in first, right? So as an example, I need to sleep 7 hours a day, like minimum. And so it has to be 7 hours a day. And so like that is just on my calendar and I'm not moving that. And then, another thing that, I think people assume that I'm a machine in terms of, creating all of this content, but I'm a person, right? And so the thing is, I need time to play video games. I need time to watch TV. I need time to read books. Like I need time to be me. And so I have to schedule that time in and say, sorry, this is my time. No one gets to touch this time, right? And then basically, okay, work, right? Like in terms of work, of course, work is very, very important. But at some point you start hitting diminishing marginal returns where when you keep focusing on the same thing, there's not a lot more progress you can make, right? And so basically I've decided that for me, work is maybe, 50 hours or 55 hours a week, and any more than that is not helping my company move forward and is not the highest ROI thing that I can be doing, right? So basically then it's like, okay, I'm going to schedule in these 50 to 55 hours every week. This is as much as I'm working. I'm not working anymore. And then from there, it's like, okay, now I have this remaining time. How do I want to schedule that time to go pursue my other passions, right? Whether that is going to be speaking, whether it's going to be writing, et cetera. And so one of the things that Nikunj can actually say from firsthand experience is, we've had to try to schedule, this particular talk over many, many months. And part of that reason is because I needed to make sure that I was scaling myself correctly, right? Because the thing is, if I had tried to slot in this talk in another week where I had a bunch of talks, like I would burn out. And so it's like, I need to just make sure that I'm doing things sustainably. And so that's why we wound up talking kind of, 3 to 4 months after the originally scheduled time. And so it's all about making sure that we can do the things that we want to do over the long haul and not just like in a short period of time. Like, how do we make sure that we pace ourselves? And so basically first, it comes down to prioritization, right? There's so many things that you can do with your time, but you only have 128 hours a week, I think, or 168 hours a week, right? And so it's like, first go ahead and block out all of the times that you have to protect. And then from there, then you can start thinking through the trade-offs of what are the things that I could be doing and, how much do I want to invest in those things? Like basically at some point, after you invest past that point, you get diminishing marginal returns, and then you might feel like investing in something else makes a lot more sense, right? So basically first it comes to prioritization, not even about like the scheduling and the systems, just what are your priorities in life? Because the days that we live becomes the lives that we live, right? And so it's like, if we don't actually take control of each day and each week that we're living, our lives become out of control, right? So it's like, first off, what are your priorities, right? Prioritize for those things and protect your time that way. And then once you have that, when you do decide on like the things that you're doing, how do you make sure that you keep doing the things that you're doing, right? And so I think one of the things that people are very impressed with is, oh, like Clement, you've written so many articles. How the hell did you do that? And the thing is, there's one of the things that, one of the traps that people fall into is they think, oh, well, if I'm motivated, I'm going to do X, Y, Z. And I'm just going to tell you from firsthand experience that motivation is very fickle. Like sometimes motivation doesn't come and then you're stuck. You have writer's block, or like you want to do something else. You just don't want to do the thing that you're supposed to be doing. And then it drags on and on and on and on. And that's just not good. But the thing that you can do is that you can create momentum. And what I mean by that, it's like, if you schedule your time so that exactly at this time, I'm going to be doing this thing that's important to me, even if I don't feel like doing it, you're going to keep doing it. And that's going to be really, really important, right? And so in my very first year writing articles, I wrote 1 article per week. And I knew that to write an article every week, it's going to take me 10 hours. It takes me 2 hours to identify the topic that I want to talk about and to like do the basic research, 3 hours to write the first draft, 3 hours to edit it, and then 2 more hours basically to optimize it for SEO, to do all the design work, and then to publish it, right? And so the thing is, that means that every Saturday morning at 10 a.m., I'm going to start doing the research. Then I'm going to have lunch from 12 to 1. And then I'm going to go from 1 to 4 in terms of writing up my first draft, right? And then from there on Sunday, then what I'm going to do is then like from 9 to 12, I'm going to do the editing. Then 12 to 1, I'm going to have the lunch. And then in the afternoon, I'm going to like do like the final polish, and then I'm going to publish it on Monday. And so basically like there's this forcing function that forces you to have to go do all of this stuff without you worrying about, am I motivated or not, right? And I think that's really helped me power through a lot of the weeks where I didn't feel that motivation. Because the thing is, once you get that momentum, momentum itself creates motivation, right? And so the thing is, whenever you find yourself struggling at work and you're like, oh my God, I hate what I'm doing, I don't feel motivated at all. Don't worry, just go do a really, really small thing, a really, really tiny thing. You just need to get your juices in motion. You just need to do a little bit of stuff. And as soon as you do that stuff, you're gonna feel like, wow, like I got this, I have energy. And then you're gonna take that energy and use it to go do a bigger thing. And then you use that to make a bigger thing and a bigger thing. And so with that, then you get to work through your entire workday without worrying about like, how heavy is my workload? You can basically manage your energy rather than trying to manage your motivation, right? So that's kind of how I think about, how do I sustainably do a lot of the stuff that I'm doing? It's really, what are the times by which I want to have something done, working backward from there, and then locking that system in, and then making sure that I protect that time so that I continue to do the things that are important to me.
Wow, that's a lot of wisdom to process. I really wish we actually made this a paid event, given how much the amount of wisdom you've dished out. So for so many of us, especially in India, Silicon Valley is this promised land where all the magic happens. So could you just like give us a peek into what life is like over there? How are some of the best products in the world created in Silicon Valley? What makes things click in that part of the world?
Yeah, great question. So I think the way in which I think about Silicon Valley is that it's very egalitarian, and that it's not expected that like the product manager comes up with every single idea. Like in fact, the vast majority of the best ideas don't come from me, and I don't want them to come from me, right? It's all about making sure that, you know, everyone is working together as a team, and that, you know, we're acting as equals in terms of our own subject matter expertise. And that means that, you know, rather than having a hierarchy of, you know, oh, this person said this, so we're going to go do that thing. It's about like challenging each other to make sure that we're creating something that is actually really, really valuable, right? And I think, you know, by working together as peers and as equals, we get to create so much more life. We get to have a lot of fun in like the stuff that we're doing, and, you know, try all these really crazy ideas that then boil down to something that actually really makes sense, right? And so I think a couple of places where the magic really kicks in is, you know, there are times when we're doing, let's say, like a hackathon, right? Where, you know, even at work, what we do is everyone takes 3 days off of work. Like we don't do any work at Blend. We just build stuff together under the 72-hour deadline. And we just build whatever the hell we want to build. And so it's like product managers and like salespeople and account managers and support people and designers and engineers, whatever, we're all just like throwing out random ideas and trying out different stuff and then basically iterating out very, very quickly. And some of our best product ideas, some of our like most lasting, you know, sales pieces all actually came from these hackathons, right? And so basically in a hackathon, like you get all this spark, you get all this energy where people are just basically bouncing things off of each other. And you get to see this really rich and diverse set of perspectives that you're kind of weighing against each other, kind of iterating against very, very rapidly to really make this stuff happen, right? And so I think one of the things that has been very hard for Silicon Valley is the lack of co-location right now, just in terms of the pandemic. We're all working from home. Because when we were co-located, it was really, really easy to basically say, I'm grabbing you and you, we're gonna go sit in a room and we're gonna go think about stuff and we're gonna like write on whiteboards or whatever. And yeah, sometimes that means that you work really late into the night, or sometimes that means that you work on the weekends, but we thought that that was fun, right? Like basically, you know, sometimes I'd come into the office on a weekend and like we would all buy like, you know, burgers next door or whatever, and we'd sit down for basically like 3 hours and we'd think about this, like all of this random stuff, and like use that weekend time basically to, you know, be really ideative, to really think about like what are the different ways in which we can attack a problem, not just from, you know, like a business perspective, but also from the customer perspective and like the design and engineering perspective, again, to like come up with a really long lasting solution to the customer, the business, and the development team, right? And so basically it's, you know, a lot of that magic just comes from really diving deep into what are the pains that people are facing, creating enough time for us to break outside of our day-to-day thinking processes and really working together as like friends and like as like entrepreneurs and co-founders of an idea of how are we going to make a thing that actually really matters. Let's ignore everything that we've built before. Let's not even worry about that. What is a problem that we think is really interesting that like we want to go ahead and attack, right? And like sometimes you just get really amazing things that come from that. And so I'd say basically in terms of Silicon Valley, you know, a lot of that magic comes from, you know, people sitting down in coffee shops or like meeting each other at like networking events and whatever, and they start talking about random ideas. And these random ideas, they bounce off of each other, and all of a sudden, like the magic clicks, and now it's like, let's ideate, like let's work through all this stuff as peers, and let's like test that. Let's really challenge ourselves to refine that idea, so that instead of it being a hierarchy, it's the people that we report to aren't ourselves. It's not our managers. The people that we report to are our customers, our business stakeholders, our development stakeholders. Like those are the people that we report to day in and day out. And so like when we think of ourselves as servant leaders who are equals in trying to attack a really gnarly problem, and we're willing to pour in a lot of personal energy into it, that's where the magic happens.
Wow, it sounds really impressive. And I imagine it's just 3 C's that are unbridled and encouraged. That's curiosity, creativity, and collaboration, if I were to put it succinctly.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So what does it take for a product to impress Clement? Like, what are your favorites? What is it that you like about them?
Yeah. So I think for me, I think, and this is like personal taste. So definitely don't think about this as like, oh, this is how you should judge every product.
Right.
For me, it's about how lastingly do you solve a pain that I didn't even realize that I had. For me, it's not about like the flashiness or about the prettiness. For me, it's just like, how much did you unlock a new superpower in me that I didn't even realize that I had, right? And so when I think about like digital products, one of the things that I really, really like are offline readers. And so the thing is like, I really love to read. And in the past, like when I was traveling a lot, it was very hard to read because like, you know, my internet connection would fail or I wouldn't have Wi-Fi or whatever. Like if I was on a train, if I was on a plane, whatever. And so like these offline readers, basically what they do is, you know, the one that I'm thinking about specifically is Pocket. So Pocket is owned by Mozilla, which also runs Firefox. And so basically what Pocket does is you decide like the articles that you want to save. And then like the articles that you save, like, when you're not traveling, it uses Wi-Fi to download all these articles onto your device locally. So then when you're traveling and you don't have Wi-Fi, you're able to go ahead and still read all the things that you want to read. And I think that has enabled me to learn a lot about a lot of different disciplines, to be able to take a lot of time to read a lot more stuff than I used to be able to read, because now I have all of this knowledge at my fingertips that I didn't used to have. And so I think I really like Pocket, not because of its flashy user interface, but because they really thoughtfully work through all the pains that I would run into, right? It's like, okay, how do we make sure that like we save information? How do we make sure that, you know, you can access it while you're offline? How do we make sure that we manage the space on your phone? How do we give you a really easy way to be able to save the articles that you're seeing? And I think they just were really thoughtful about like, here's the pain and we're going to eliminate that pain so it's totally invisible, right? And so like, it's very much to me something that was really well thought through of just like tackling a bunch of pains, right? So that's the one that I'm a really big fan of, just in terms of this offline reader. In terms of like physical products, because physical products are themselves also products, I think the most surprising answer that I've got is actually chopsticks. And so the thing is, with chopsticks, right, like it's literally 2 sticks. And the reason why I think chopsticks are really interesting as a product is because they're not particularly intuitive, right? Like a knife is really intuitive because you take the thing and you cut it, right? And like the superpower that a knife gives you is you're now able to cut through things that you weren't able to cut through. But chopsticks, they're very versatile. Like it's literally just 2 sticks and you can use it as a fork, you can use it as a spoon, you can use it as a knife, you can cut things, pick up things, flip things, whatever. And I think that is very interesting. It's a very out of the box way of thinking of here is, you know, this very different kind of toolkit that you have to be able to unlock all of these different abilities that you didn't have before, right? And so kind of the way in which I think about products, whether they're physical or digital, is what is the new superpower that it unlocks and how seamlessly does it unlock the superpower so that it just feels like something that I've always had for all of my life, right? And I think that really defines how powerful a product is how natural of an extension is it of your capabilities to be able to do all of these things. And I think, again, like using the term superpower is like something that I don't say lightly. It's a word that I chose specifically because it should let you do something that you weren't able to do before, because that means that you've eliminated a pain, right? And so like when we think about the products that we want to build, it's all about what are the things that people are struggling with? What are the superpowers that they wish they had? How do we give this to them in the most natural and easy to use way so that they're not struggling with all these other things that are stuck in the way to try to activate their superpower, right? Because it's like, as an example, right? Like it would be pretty useless if you were Superman and you could fly, but before you had to fly, you had to do a ritual for like, let's say 10 minutes, right? Like that would be very not helpful because then you can't fly on demand. And so it's like, how do we cut down the time as much as possible so you can just go and fly whenever you want to fly, right? How can you turn on your X-ray vision without having to think about it, right? Like how do we give you all these capabilities without you having to think about it, right? And so I think a lot of product management is one, identifying, yes, the superpower that you want, but then the other part is how do we remove all the things that are in your way to get you to unlock that superpower? And I think that is also a really important part of product too.
Wow. So far we've addressed the past, we've addressed the present, and this is the $1 million question, the future. How do you think product management and products will pan out as they become more global? And like, where do you see things going from here into the foreseeable future, at least?
Yeah, so I'd say that, so in terms of how I think about products, I would say, first off, there is a really exciting opportunity in the world where I think there are still a lot of geographies that are not all the way up to speed on modern software product management, right? I think a lot of places in the world still don't even really understand the concept of Scrum, right? And so one of the things that I'm trying to do is I'm trying to educate a lot of different geographies. You know, I've done speaker events for, you know, Kenya, Nigeria, Vietnam, et cetera, really trying to help folks wrap their heads around, you know, going towards this like product management. I think one of the challenges is you can't really talk about modern software product management without talking about design thinking and without thinking about Scrum. But like those are such hard concepts to move from kind of classic business traditions that like this step is hard enough that you can't get people to jump all the way straight to product management, right? So I think part one is in the world, there's still a lot of opportunity in terms of teaching people how to be agile and how to be customer focused and customer obsessed before you even get to the product thinking part. And then for those who are now more Scrum-like and more Agile-like, then there's a lot of opportunity to move them towards product management. And so I think first off, while, Silicon Valley and like United States has a lot of, really has a lot of kind of the pioneering in terms of how to think about products, I think there's still a lot of opportunity for a lot of parts of the world to not just catch up, but also to be able to contribute their best practices and to be able to continue to build out this industry, right? So I think that is something that's really exciting. And I think there's still a lot of latent potential within product management. So I'd say that's one part. Another part is in terms of product management, I think more and more things are turning into software products, right? I think one of the things that I thought was really interesting was, a grocery store, like a grocery store chain had actually reached out to me saying, Clement, we'd like to turn our IT team into product managers. How do we do that, right? I had a bank reach out to me and say, Clement, I'd like to turn our IT team into product managers. How do we do that, right? And so it's like more and more previously offline or previously traditional businesses are moving into trying to think agile and trying to think in terms of solutions rather than, just being business focused, right? I think when we think about old IT, a lot of it is like businesses trying to solve for businesses rather than product managers trying to solve for customers and businesses and development teams, right? And so I think like moving the focus away from like, how are we going to make revenue and how are we going to make profits and how can we be efficient, changes into being, how do we solve all these people's problems really delightfully? And so I think that is a really interesting trend that is happening kind of in all of these different spaces where you didn't necessarily see product managers before. I think the last part is I see that we're going to need a lot more diversity in terms of the kinds of product managers that we get. And so in the past, right, like a lot of times product managers, they are ex-engineers, right? And part of the reason is just because of the history of product, right? Like in the past, right, like when Apple got started or whatever, there was a bunch of engineers who were in a garage who were working on stuff. And then someone said, well, we need to do the business side of the house. I tend to be better at it. And they accidentally became product managers. And so then you had a lot of product managers who are ex-engineers. And so I think one of the challenges of Silicon Valley is many companies, not all, not even the majority, but many companies still think that product managers need to have engineering backgrounds. And I disagree, because if you're overly captured on the engineering side of the house in this triangle, right, you miss the customer's needs, you miss the business's needs, right? And so, one of the things that I think has been really detrimental is, as an example, when we think about social media is really divisive because a lot of it is like engineering problems to try to move metrics without really understanding the people. And so now you see, all of this, you see a lot of hate and you see a lot of echo chambers and all these challenges in terms of social media because people were just trying to chase metrics without trying to understand what is the pain that we're trying to solve, right? And so that's the problem when all of your product managers are all ex-engineers, right? You want product managers who came from customer support. You want product managers who came from sales. You want product managers who come from all of these different backgrounds, because if the world is going to become so much more diverse in terms of the kinds of problems we're going to solve with products, you need a similarly diverse set of people to do that. Because again, there are no perfect product managers. There are no universally good product managers. And so it's like the best product manager for a particular problem depends on the kind of problem that you're trying to attack. And so because the types of problems are becoming so much more diverse, we need a lot more diversity in terms of the kinds of product managers that we have. And so I think one of the things that I think is really encouraging is that so many more people want to become product managers, right? And so I think the potential supply in terms of having all of these diverse product managers is going to be there. I think it's more about the demand side. How do companies continue to learn that we can reach for people who are not kind of traditional product managers in terms of being ex-MBAs or ex-engineers? How do we pull from a more diverse candidate pool to be able to create products that are a lot more compassionate and that better solve the problem, right? And so I think that is something that we're going to see, really amazing businesses do well. It's taking diverse product management people and using them to attack diverse problems rather than monolithically hiring one kind of product manager and then expecting them to solve all the different kinds of problems that they have. And so I expect to see a diversity in terms of the future kinds of PMs that we'll have. And so what I mean by that then is it's a lot less important for you to have a specific career track of I'm going to be an MBA or I'm going to be an ex-engineer or I'm going to be a data scientist. And it's more about understanding the pains that people are trying to attack, and then like customizing yourself to go attack those pains, creating your own roadmap, understanding your own value proposition to go attack that. Because the companies that understand that product managers need to fit their problems, those are the ones that are going to win, right? Like as an example at Blend, I think we do this really, really well. Blend's product managers are like very diverse. Like we come from a lot of really weird industries that have nothing to do with fintech. And we are all very different in terms of our skill sets. And that's really good because it means that we have a lot more flexibility in terms of the kinds of problems that we want to attack, right? And so like, I'm not gonna be like an API product manager, and I'm not gonna be like a mobile app product manager at Blend, because those are different kinds of problems and need different kinds of skill sets. And so I can't be traded with an equivalent product manager at Blend because there are no equivalents. Like there are so many different kinds of problems for us to go solve, right? So I think the businesses that really understand that they need a diverse pool of product managers to attack a diverse pool of problems are the ones that are really gonna succeed.
So I guess it's very often the problems and your ability to provide a solution that defines whether you can fit the frame and be the right person, not just your technical background or your education, I suppose. So
Yeah.
it's been an absolute pleasure to speak to you, to ask all these questions. I guess it's time to extend that to others on the call as well. So let me just pick up questions from the audience that have been put up so far. One of them is from Anish Badri. He says, great points of motivation. How do you maintain quality when you have a fixed timeline? Aren't you bogged down by drop in quality, or do you think quality drop doesn't happen at all?
Yeah, good question. So I think it's all about working backwards and working backwards early, right? And so specifically, so for the audience, I think this question is a little bit more targeted towards the stuff that I do outside of work in terms of like writing articles or writing books. It's trying to work backwards from the thing that you're trying to do and then making sure that you plan for that. So as an example, when I published a book, earlier in January 2020, I worked backwards and I said, okay, this is the type of quality that I want, which then means that I need to schedule this amount of time to go make these things happen. If I need this amount of time, what are the commitments that I'm going to go drop so that I can fit this thing in, right? And so it's not that you're arbitrarily time boxing yourself, is that you are consciously time boxing yourself to go achieve the outcomes that you want to achieve, right? And so like, if I had tried to time box myself to say like, I'm going to write an article in an hour, like I guarantee you the article is going to be really terrible, right? And so it's like, you need to work backwards. What is the thing that you want to achieve? How much time is it going to take you? And then like, okay, can you make that trade-off? Are there things that you can drop away from your schedule to do that? If there aren't, then do you need to make a trade-off in terms of like decreasing your desired quality and like have that trade-off? Or like maybe instead of changing the quality, you change the frequency, right? And so as an example, when I first started with PMHQ, I published one article every week. Now I publish one every month because I have all these other commitments that I want to maintain. It doesn't mean that I've stopped writing. It means that I've changed the frequency of the writing because I don't want to try to write an article once a week with like 4 times less time. But at the same time, I also don't want to not write at all because it's so important. And so I think it's all about having these trade-offs of this is the outcome that I want. Here's what defines success for me. Let's work backwards to say how much time we're going to need from that. And then let's talk about the trade-offs. Are the trade-offs that I'm going to take away other things from my schedule and my priorities? Or have I aimed way too high and let's actually aim a little bit lower so that we can actually get that all to fit in?
Right. So how did you first approach the quality versus quantity trade-off as far as PMHQ is concerned? And more importantly, at least I'm curious about this, where does PMHQ go forward, like from this point onwards? Like what's in the future for you guys? What are you planning?
Yeah, great question. So I think in terms of quantity versus quality, right? I think it all boils down to how well did we solve people's pain, right? And so I think initially, part of the challenge was there wasn't a lot of quantity of like really thoughtful articles on business to business product management, right? And so like there was an immediate gap that we had to go close. And so that's where I said, I'm not going to move the quality bar. Like I want articles that anyone from any background, right? Like doesn't have to be an engineer, doesn't have to be a product manager. Anyone from any background can read and have a really have personal experiences to draw on from my own personal experiences and have a framework that then they can take with them no matter what it is that they're doing, right? And so like that is the quality. I'm not going to budge on that. How much quantity can I create? And like, how do I want to trade off on that in terms of all my other stuff, right? So that's how I originally did that. And then after that, it's okay, well, that quality is really important, but I have less time. So that means I'm going to go drop the quantity so that I can go do other things, but still maintain the same high quality of thought that comes from Product Manager HQ. And so kind of that's the direction that we're headed. Sorry, so that was kind of the past set of trade-offs that I had to make in terms of thinking about PMHQ. In terms of where we're headed in the future, I think one of the things that, we are interested in is, opening up the gates a little bit more so that, more people are able to drive like more of their own like pain solutioning. I think, one of the things that, again, like my co-founder and I were very lucky to do was we were able to go solve our own pains and then like see that a community was formed around it. But, just because we have our own pains doesn't mean that everyone else has the same pains. And so I think, a lot of folks in the community, they are interested in tackling new things. So for example, one of the things that we recently shipped was a technical product management course, right? Like online, because that's something that, people in the community said, this is really, really painful. Like I want to become more technical as a PM. And so like, then we were able to go and create this like video course to go tackle that problem. And it's like, that's like the challenge there is that draws on like the founding team's bandwidth. How do we make it so that we don't have to draw on our own bandwidth, which is limited, and enable the community to self-solve those pains, right? And so I think some things that we're considering is, how might we create podcasts? How might we create things like, let's say like unconferences where people are able to work together to basically talk through the problems that they're tackling? How do we give people more credit and visibility for contributing a lot to the community? And so I think these are the things that we're actively thinking through of how do we empower the community to be able to do more without necessarily the founding team being involved in like every step of the way. Of course, we're going to be there to help like kickstart it, but I think we don't want to be the bottlenecks there. How can we give the community kind of more self-serve tooling so that we can continue to achieve this vision of the community growing itself rather than being bottlenecked by us trying to grow the community, right? So I think that's the direction that we're trying to head towards, is basically kind of more democratization and more kind of self-serve initiatives, kind of rather than having everything kind of flow through me and my co-founder. So yeah.
Right. So I'll just take one final question before we wrap this up. What are the skills that you think people should focus on early in their careers, like when they start off as an associate or an APM? Like you could give that advice from me since I'm starting my career myself. Mm-hmm. So like, how do you think, what do you think one should do?
Yeah, so I think there are, the way that I see the world, there are only two skill sets that you need, and you only need these two skill sets for any job. And so I realize that's gonna sound like a really crazy claim, but I really do believe it. So the very first thing that you need is you need empathy. You need to actually care about the person that you're going to be helping, because if you don't care about them, you're not gonna be able to identify their pain and solve for them, right? I think a lot of times people come into jobs or people come into extracurriculars very selfishly, right? And so when they come into a job, I want to be hired, I want to be paid, I want to be promoted, I want this job title, rather than this company has this pain. This company is trying to do this thing that they don't know how to do. Like they are struggling and I can solve that pain for them, right? And so like having that empathy really makes you different from everyone else. Similarly, in terms of PMHQ, right? Or like in terms of communities or brand building, right? I think one of the things is like, how do I phrase this? A lot of people might start blogs or might start podcasts or whatever because they're saying, I want to be famous. And the thing is, then they wind up not being famous because they're solving for themselves rather than solving for other people. And so when you think about who am I solving the pain for and how do I go make their lives better, that then kind of gives you the fame kind of on accident, right? So like, I didn't expect to, there was no point in time at which I thought, oh, wow, like I'm going to be speaking to all these audiences around the world and I'm going to be writing all these books. Like that wasn't the goal. The goal was, I have all of these friends who are struggling to break into product management and I've broken in before. Let me help them. And I found out, okay, I can help them, but I'm running out of time and there are all these other people I want to help. How can I take this information and make it so that it's publicly available rather than just my friends benefiting from me, right? And then it's, okay, now that's publicly available in terms of articles, right? Like how can we extend this so that other people who don't read articles, people who are attending conferences or whatever, how do we make sure that they're able to access all this information, right? And so because of that, like now I have tens of thousands of followers on LinkedIn, right? Like my articles have been read so many, hundreds of thousands of times or whatever. That didn't come from me saying, I want to be read so many times. It came from, there's a pain that I'm trying to solve. And because I solved that pain very well, I naturally got all the benefits that came from it, right? And so, again, skill set number one is empathy. You need to really care about the other person's life and you need to really care about making their lives better. And when you create value for other people, they will let you capture that value, right? Like value in the world, you must create value if you want to capture it. If you don't create value, there's nothing for you to capture, right? And so it's all about having empathy and it's taking the time to be human with other people to understand what are their pains and how can you best solve them, right? So that's the most important part, is empathy. The second most important skill set is how to learn. And so basically it is like, the faster you can learn things, the less problematic anything is going to be for you, right? Whether you want to change industries or stay in the same industry, whether you want to, be a product manager or, be any type of role, the faster you can learn stuff, kind of the lower the barriers are. And that just means that you have so many more opportunities ahead of you, right? And so the reason why I say speed to learning is because speed to learning automatically gives you all of these other skill sets that you didn't have before, right? And so as an example, I'm really fast at onboarding onto new tech stacks in terms of product management, right? So like, I know how to use, Figma and Envision app and Sketch, right? And like, if you throw me any other design app, I will learn it in 3 days minimum. Like in terms of maximum time. If you give me like some sort of like project management tool, I'll learn it in like 2 to 3 days, right? Like if you give me any sort of documentation app, I'll learn it in 2 to 3 days, right? Like if you tell me, Clement, we're moving you from this industry in terms of like auto loans, and we're going to move you into the credit cards industry, I'll learn that industry in 2 weeks, right? And so it's like, because I can learn things so quickly, it makes it very low cost for me to be able to attack anything. Whereas for other people, it'd be very high cost. And so that means that it's no longer the skill sets that I have, it's the skill sets that I will have that are more important, right? Because again, if someone, let's say, had 10 years of experience, but they weren't growing anymore, right? And you have 0 years of experience, but you're growing at a rate that is like, let's say, 2 years worth of their experience every month. In 5 months, you'll be equal to them. In 6 months, you'll be better than them. And you'll continue to be better than them over like the rest of your life. And so it's really important that you learn how to learn and that you think about how to learn even faster every single time, right? And so it's like, whatever it is that you learn on this conference or like this call, right? Like think about how long it took you to learn that and how can you learn that stuff even faster, right? How can you learn things even faster when you read articles? How can you learn things even faster when you're on the job? Your speed to learning is one of the most important things that you can control in your life. And once you become really, really fast at learning, you can basically do anything that you want, no matter what. And so again, it's like, when you think about what is the problem that I'm trying to solve for someone else, not for me, for someone else, I'm going to go create value in someone else's life. And I'm going to be able to learn as fast as I can to go make that problem go away. That unlocks infinite opportunity for you, right? And so like, those are the only 2 skill sets that I say you absolutely must have, is you must be able to understand other people's pain and you must force yourself to learn faster. Once you have those things, no other skill sets matter, honestly.
Thank you so much for this, Clement. And before we wrap up, there's a couple of points I'd like to mention. So for the attendees here, in case you wish to check out undiscovered gems from Clement, just go search for him on LinkedIn. Like if you find any quality content on, not on LinkedIn, sorry, on Reddit. If you were to find any quality PM content on Reddit, it's from him. It's Clement Cow 1.